Sit back, make yourselves comfortable, because we're going to zip through 135 years of history concerning this fantastic and beautiful building in the leafy suburbs of South Belfast, Galwally House. I'm going to be focusing, to be honest, mainly on its use as a hospital, but I will be interspersing some of the other aspects of the house and what it has been used for. The first time you see references to Galwally House in the newspapers is in April 1936, when it's described as, when it's an advertisement for the house to be let for the season. So obviously the owner was clearing off to the countryside or Crete or wherever and was letting out the house. Now that house, that Galwally House, was not the house that we know of and that is on the screen at the minute. This house is recorded as being situated in the valley below Newtownbreda Church, and it was on a 5 to 6 acre plot, and it was occupied by Mr. James Carruthers. In April 1846, this Galwally House was the residence of Dr. McClure, and then in April 1884, Galwally House with 1 acre of land was listed as a property for sale. And it's round about this time that we find the situation where Galwally House, as we now know it, on a 10 acre site, was came into existence. The first time Galwally House is marked on one of the Ordnance Survey maps is on the 3rd edition, which is from around about 1900. So by that time, the house had been built. But you can see the size of the extent of the property. If you look up in one corner of the estate, there's a U-shaped building which would have been the stable block and would later have become where the cars were stored. Down in the opposite corner, there was a lake, which is now roughly where the car park of B&Q is located and part of B&Q. You can also see that this property was just outside the Union. This is the Union boundary. So basically this marked the end of Belfast. And then you get into Lisburn. So at that time, births, marriages and deaths in the Galwally area were registered under Lisburn and not under Belfast. At this time, there were 2 other detached mansions in the same area. Red Roofs, which was owned by one of the members of the Corrie family, the J.P. Corrie family, and Drumkeen, which obviously later became a hotel. There's also a pair of semi-detached houses down in this corner on what we would now call Upper Galwally, and that was called Northview. In the 1901 Belfast Street Directory, there's another house called Haslar, and it was occupied by Henry Herbert Martin, and it lay between Northview, which is down here, and Drumkeen, which is up here. So that's just to give you an idea of what it was like shortly after it was built. Surrounded by green fields, there was a few houses on what was then called Galwally Avenue, but really there was nothing else in the area. Galwally House was built for Mr. John Martin, a building contractor, and was under construction in 1885 on land that was owned by the Bateson family of Beaver. It was constructed on an east-west axis with the main entrance facing west. It is a symmetrical multi-bay 2-story house with a pedimented entrance bay. It was built in Dumfries red sandstone, and it was built by H&J Martin, and I'll come on to that in a few minutes. The architect of the building of the house is not known, but it is believed that the house was designed by William Henry Lynn. And that's because H&J Martin and Lynn were working together on other buildings made from the same material, principally the Belfast Central Library on Royal Avenue, which was built round about the same time. Although there are lots of photographs of other mansion houses across Belfast and some of the rural areas, neither myself nor Richard Graham have been able to locate any of Galwally House. This particular photograph, which is probably the closest, is actually from 1953. You can see that there's the 1-story extension is here, and you can just see over at the other side some of the UVF hospital wards. But in essence, that's what the house would have looked like when it was constructed in 1885. On the very front of the house, above the main entrance, is the crest, and this is taken from the book by Alf McCreary, The History of H&J Martin, and this is the family crest and the family motto, Hinc Fortior et Clarior, which translates as henceforth stronger and brighter. Now, with the original house, there's two particular elements that I would like to highlight. If you get a chance to arrange to get access, do take it up, because it is worth having a look around, even in its current layout and situation. A small atrium or lantern was located in the middle of the house. You can see that from the aerial photograph. Almost smack in the middle of the house, you've got this lantern. This is the photo. The other photograph was taken by myself, lying on the ground, lying on the floor, looking straight up, or as close to straight up as I could. This would have provided light to the first floor and to the ground floor originally. The opening between the ground floor and the first floors has been covered over when the house was converted to offices in order to meet health and safety regulations. But it's a fantastic just to be able to see that. Okay, the glass could do with a bit of a clean, but it's still very impressive. The other feature that I want to highlight is the stained glass window, which is on the main staircase. And it's in what's called the aesthetic movement style. The aesthetic movement predated Art Nouveau, but a lot of the imagery and so forth of Art Nouveau built on the aesthetic movement. And basically the aesthetic movement was construction windows that were pleasing on the eye. And I think you can see that where there's quite a lot of plain glass, but then you've got these very detailed glass with leaves and rosebuds and so forth. This is, on this side of the screen, you've got the windows that are in Galwally. And on this side, you've got a photograph of a window that I found that is designated as being from the aesthetic movement. And I think you can see the similarities in the style there. In the at the very bottom of the window, you have two circles which depict nesting birds. And then between them on either side, there's a figure of a female and a figure of a male. We don't know who those people are. Whether it's, we don't think it's Henry Martin, John Martin's father, but it might be a generation back, but we're just not sure. Up at the top of the window, you also then have the family crest again, the lion holding a sword upright. John Martin was born on 2nd August 1846, and he entered into the employment of J.P. Corrie, a timber merchant, when he had completed his formal education. Henry Martin, his father, was a building contractor, and he had close business and social connections with the Corrie family. Obviously, as timber merchants and building contractors, they would have worked hand in glove, to mix my metaphors. The H&J Martin firm, which was created when John Martin joined his father in the family firm, and it became H&J Martin. The firm name still exists, although it's now a component within the Lagan Group. One of Henry Martin's first major contracts had been to build Elmwood Presbyterian Church on the corner of Elmwood Avenue and University Road, although the bell tower was a later addition. H&J Martin were originally located on Great Victoria Street, but moved to the Ulster Building Works in the area between the Ormer Road and the River Lagan. There were numerous brickworks in that area, making use of the clay from the river. And these included Annandale Brickworks, Prospect Brickworks, and Marquis Brickworks. So obviously there was a lot of brickworks in that area. There were also lots of brickworks in other parts of Belfast, Ravenhill Road, and on the other side of the Lagan at Stranmillis. Whilst H&J Martin built houses, for example, at Kitchener Street off the Donegal Road, The firm was responsible for building some of Belfast's most iconic buildings in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This map from the official history of the firm by Alf McCreary shows some of those buildings, and I think it's a fantastic way that it's being presented. Down in one corner, you've got the Ulster Building Works, you've got Donegal Road Terrace, you've got Kitchener Street, and you've got Agincourt Avenue, which were all residential developments building. And on the other side, you've got all the more social, the more political or commercial buildings that they were involved in. So I'm going to run through some of those. And some of them aren't mentioned because obviously in this image for the inside cover of the book, they didn't want it being too cluttered with buildings. So on Royal Avenue, H&J Martin built the Belfast Central Library, the main Belfast Evening Telegraph office, and the Grand Central Hotel, Queen's Buildings, which was on the corner of Berry Street, and the Royal Avenue offices for the Belfast City and District Water Commissioners. Now that Water Commissioner's office block is long gone, but Queen's Building is still there, Grand Central Hotel is gone, but Belfast Central Library and the Belfast Evening Telegraph office are still there. The firm also built the Harbour office in Corporation Square, the Robinson and Cleaver building, Belfast City Hall, the Grand Opera House, the Theatre Royal in Arthur Square, which again has been demolished, and St George's Market. Outside Belfast, the firm built the Purtisburn Villa Colony, the Antrim Asylum, and the Slieve Donard Hotel. And those are just the ones that the company built before the First World War. After the First World War, as you can see on the map, you've got Stranmillis College and the Ulster Museum. John Martin had married Isabella McAfee on 6 February 1872 at First Hollywood Presbyterian Church. And they were living at Marlborough Terrace on University Street when their fourth child was born in 1885. Their only children born at Galwally House were twins, James and John, in October 1888. I'll say a bit more about John Martin Jr. later. Isabella Martin died of an epileptic convulsion at Galwally House on 20th October 1888, aged 36. And John Martin subsequently married Emily Robb, who was the daughter of John Robb of Lisnabreeny House, and they married on the 3rd of June 1890. John Robb was the principal director of John Robb and Company, the department store people who had premises on Castle Place. John Martin died of a cerebral hemorrhage at Galwally House on 22nd January 1912 and is buried in Belfast City Cemetery. His estate was valued at £71,507, which equates to 8.5 million in current terms. This ornate Celtic cross with inscriptions in the Old Gaelic script was erected at the plot. In addition to being a prominent member of Newtownbreda Presbyterian Church, John Martin was a devoted adherent to the Masonic Order, the Royal Arch Chapter, and was a Knight Templar. He was a delegate at the 1892 Ulster Unionist Convention, and his obituary described him as being a sound unionist in politics and a confirmed upholder of the legislative union of Great Britain and Ireland. He was a life governor of the Belfast Royal Hospital, Royal Victoria Hospital, and one of the founding members of the Belfast Philharmonic Society and the Belfast Natural History and Philosophical Society. He did not live to see the establishment of the Ulster Solemn League and Covenant, but several members of the family signed the Ulster Covenant or the Ulster Declaration. 7 people gave their address as Galwally House on Ulster Day 1912, although two have the surname Johnston. I'm not quite sure what their connection was to the family, whether they were visiting or whatever. John's widow Emily and their daughter Alison signed the Ulster Declaration, and John's sons George, Robert, James and John signed the Ulster Declaration. Another son, Henry Herbert Martin of Haslar, also signed the Covenant. In April 1914, the house on 10 acres of land was put on the market with J. Alfred Macaulay of Arthur Street handling the sale. By 1915, Emily Martin was living at Dunavon on Derryvolgie Avenue when her youngest daughter, Mary Elizabeth, married Hugh Harper, a solicitor of Chichester Park. In 1915, the newspapers reported that the Ulster Division's Army Service Corps Field Bakery was established in a field beside Galwally House. It's unclear whether this means the camp was in the grounds of the house or in the surrounding area. In June 1914, the Belfast Newsletter reported that Henry Herbert Martin's garage, a wooden structure with a felt roof, at Galwally House was completely destroyed in an arson attack that was attributed to the suffragettes. In the fire, an Arroll Johnson four-seater motorcar, as depicted, and the bicycle were destroyed. Now, I have a bit of a query on this one. Henry Herbert Martin had been living in a separate property called Haslar in the Galwally area since at least 1901. And it's curious to me that he would be garaging his car at Galwally House. It's possible that the newspaper report actually refers to Galwally as an area rather than specifically to the house. At least one of John Martin's sons served in the Great War. John Martin Jr. was born on 14th October 1888 at Galwally House, and he gained a commission with the 9th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles. He was reported as wounded during the Somme offensive in July 1916. Before the war, he was employed by Martin Hill and Company, linen manufacturers of Bedford Street. And the Martin of this firm may well be another side of the family. He was also a member of the Motorcycle Union and was winner of a remarkable 100 miles handicap race at McGilligan Strand. Lieutenant John Martin is commemorated on the Roll of Honour for Newtownbreda Presbyterian Church. He survived the war. So the next change of ownership or usage was when Galwally House was purchased in 1916 by the Ulster Joint Committee of the British Red Cross and the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. And it was purchased to be used as a hospital. The purchase price was £6,000, which equates to £618,000 in current terms, or £61,800 per acre. Mrs. Anna Barber, the wife of Harold Barber of HILDEN, donated £2,000 towards the scheme and undertook to provide £1,000 per annum towards the running costs of the hospital. In current terms, that equates to a donation of £206,000 and a commitment to provide £103,000 per annum. In 1918, Anna Barber was made an officer of the Order of the British Empire for her commitment to the needs of wounded soldiers and sailors. You can now see that there's another building between Northview and Drumkeen, and we think this is where Haslar, the home of Henry Herbert Martin, was located. The HILDEN Convalescent Hospital, as it was called, was officially opened by Mrs. Anna Barber on Wednesday, 23rd May 1917. The mansion house element of the hospital provided beds for 51 patients, and there were 75 beds provided in an extensive wooden building that was erected to the south of the house. The annex, which was parallel to the house, was connected to the main house by a covered corridor. In this newspaper photograph, it's very indistinct, but it looks like the corridor joining the hospital ward to the main house had a glass roof. The annex was 150 feet long, 20 feet wide, and 35 feet high at its apex. The newspaper report on the opening of the hospital declared that the annex, as at present designed, is a magnificent apartment, well ventilated and lighted and commodious. An ideal hospital ward wherein the sufferers will receive every care and attention, and where their every want has been studied. This addition, together with the main building itself, has been fitted throughout with electricity, and there is also a gas supply in case of emergency. Fire extinguishers are also provided in every ward, and much ingenuity has been exercised in securing safety with convenience in all the arrangements. One of the 10-bed wards in the annex was named the Newfoundland Wing, as it had been fitted out and endowed by the Patriotic Committee of Newfoundland, whose president was the Earl of Ranfurly, whose lands would have been in and around Dungannon. Above each bed in this ward was an 8-pointed star with the name of the benefactor. Wounded men from the Dominion of Newfoundland were given priority in the allocation of beds in this ward. The Belfast City and District Water Commissioners provided a water supply free of charge. The adaptations were carried out under the supervision of Henry Seaver, who would later design the County Antrim War Memorial, and the contractors, no surprise, were H&J Martin. Mr. Henry Martin provided 2 flagpoles from which the flags of the British Red Cross and the Order of St. John of Jerusalem would fly. The HILDEN Convalescent Hospital admitted 761 patients during 1917, and between its opening and its closure in 1924, 1,910 military patients and 2,371 ex-servicemen were treated at the site. It's important to note that it was a convalescent hospital. It wasn't a hospital where men underwent medical procedures or operations. It was purely for men who had been treated, had the operations or whatever was required, and it was somewhere where they could convalesce. And when you think about it, this beautiful house in 10 acres of ground was the ideal location. It was away from the city centre. There was no smog. There was no smoke. There was very little smoke apart from chimneys, residential chimneys, and so the air was clean. It was an ideal location for recuperation. In addition to the matron, there were 2 fully trained charge nurses, 14 voluntary aid detachment nurses, 2 experienced female cooks, and an unspecified number of kitchen assistants. The matron of the hospital from June 1917 to August 1919 was Miss Jean Elizabeth Snodgrass, who had trained at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. She was paid £1 and 1 shilling per week in 1917, approximately £92 per week in current terms, and this had risen to £1 and 4 shillings and 10 pence per week in 1919, but that would only be approximately £71 in current terms, and that's because inflation galloped ahead. During the war, the value of the pound just plummeted. So in effect, by the end of the war, the members of staff who were on a salary or were being paid, they were working for less money per hour than they were when they first started. Jean was awarded the Royal Red Cross decoration in 1920 and was the matron of the Tyrone County Hospital from 1922 until her retirement in 1947. Jean Elizabeth Snodgrass was born on 10 September 1889 at Drumfergus in County Donegal to Scott Snodgrass and Anne Jane Hamilton. She died in December 1965 at the age of 76. In June 1919, the Northern Whig included a short report on the funeral of Private James Haveron of the Royal Army Medical Corps, who was described in the newspapers as being the first patient to be admitted to the Hilden Convalescent Hospital. James Haveron was born on 24th July 1885 at Ballyricard near Relu, and his parents were James Haveron, who's a carpenter, and Martha Ellen Holden, and the family was living at Heather Street in 1901 when James was an apprentice carpenter. The family was living at Emerson Street when James enlisted on 16th March 1903 in Belfast. He had already served in the militia, and he enlisted for a period of 3 years in regular army service and 9 years on reserve service. The attestation form records that he was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 116 pounds. His complexion was fresh, his eyes were blue, and his hair was dark brown. James was transferred to the Class A Army Reserve on 15th March 1906 and was living at the family home at Mountjoy Street in 1911. He was mobilised from the Army Reserve on 5th August 1914, the day after the start of the war. He was deployed to the 17th Field Ambulance in France. He sustained gunshot wounds on 9th August 1915 during the Battle of Hooge and was initially treated in the 18th Field Ambulance. A shrapnel ball was removed from his spinal canal and the spinal cord was badly lacerated, leaving him paralysed below the waist. He was evacuated from Etaples on hospital ship Brighton on 18th August, and he was discharged due to wounds on 1st September 1916 with the Silver War Badge. James Haveron, who was 31 years old and had served for 12 years and 351 days, was awarded a pension of 25 shillings per week, which equates to £65 per week in current terms. His discharge certificate recorded that he was, quote, honest, sober, intelligent, and industrious. James Haveron died of nephritis, an infection of the kidneys, on 8th June 1919, aged 34, and was buried in Dundonald Cemetery on the 11th of June. The funeral was attended by Dr. McIntosh from the hospital, Matron Snodgrass, and some of the staff and patients. The Norfolk Regiment provided the firing party. His father received a war gratuity of £33, 7 shillings and 4p. This is one of the voluntary aid staff who worked at the hospital, and I'm grateful to the Somme Museum for providing this photograph and providing some of the other photographs that will appear over the next few minutes. This is Jessica, or Jessie as she was known, in her VAD uniform, and on either side is the British Red Cross Society Medal for War Service and the box that it came in. So it's pristine. It has been worn, but it still has its original box. Jessie was born in Glasgow around 1893 to William Henry Roberts, a gasworks manager, and Jane McCatty. In 1901 and 1911, the family was living at Mill Street in Newtownbreda, and Jessie was recorded as being a seamstress in 1911. Jessie joined the Ulster Volunteer Force Nursing Corps during the Home Rule crisis and was living at the Gasworks House in Donaghadee when she volunteered for war service with the Voluntary Aid Detachment. She served at the 1st Southern General Hospital in Birmingham and then at the War Hospital at Wimereux. At the start of her VAD service, she received £20 per annum, which equates to approximately £1,750 per annum in current terms. In 1919, she was being paid £22 and 2 shillings per annum, and that's the equivalent of £1,265 per annum. As I mentioned earlier, the current buying power of the pound plummeted from £116 in 1915 to £57 in 1919. When Jessie returned to Ireland, she served at the HILDEN Convalescent Hospital at Galwally House and at the UVF Hospital at Botanic and Queen's University. It was at Galwally House that she met John Boyd Getty, who she married on the 27th of July 1925 at the Belfast Registrar's Office. In addition to the medal that I've already mentioned, Jessie was awarded the Proficiency in Red Cross Nursing Medal, the Proficiency in Red Cross First Aid Medal, and the Proficiency in Anti-Gas Training Medal. Moving on to talk about her husband, John Boyd Getty was born on 25th January 1894 to Robert Getty and Annie McAllister, who farmed land at Drumtulla near Moss Side up in North Antrim. In 1911, John was lodging with Stuart Fullerton at Union Street in Coleraine, and he was a student for the Presbyterian ministry at Macrae Magee College in Londonderry at the outbreak of the war. He joined the Officers Training Corps at Queen's University and received his commission with the 17th Battalion, Royal Irish Rifles, in August 1915. Following training at Newcastle, McGilligan and Ballykinler, he joined the 2nd Battalion on the Western Front on 16th February 1916. He was badly wounded on 18th March when he was standing at the entrance to a dugout when a high explosive German shell exploded nearby, and he sustained injuries to the head, side and leg. He was treated at No. 8 General Hospital in Rouen and evacuated back to the UK on 14th June on hospital ship Dover Castle. He received treatment at Lady Cooper's Hospital in Winchester, the Military Hospital at Ebrington Barracks in Londonderry, Tyrone County Hospital, and the King George's Hospital in Dublin. John Getty's leg had to be amputated, and he relinquished his commission due to ill health on 1st January 1918. His address was recorded as King George's Hospital in Dublin when he was awarded the Silver War Badge in February 1918. He was subsequently treated at HILDEN Convalescent Hospital and possibly at the limbless branch of the UVF Hospital at Queen's University. After the war, he returned to university, gaining his Bachelor of Laws degree from Trinity College in Dublin. In 1924, he came first in the Law Society's final examinations and was awarded the Society's Silver Medal. After relinquishing the chairmanship of the Agricultural Wages Board for Northern Ireland, John Boyd Getty was made an Officer of the Order of the British Empire in the Queen's Birthday Honours List in 1958. This photograph, again from the Somme Association's collection, shows John, Jessie and their son John at Buckingham Palace on the day he received his medal. John Boyd Getty was living at Domain Road in Hollywood when he died on 14th July 1976, and Jessie Getty died in December 2001. They are buried in Redburn Cemetery in Hollywood. Robert Boyle was another one of the men who was treated at HILDEN Convalescent Hospital. He was born on 3rd January 1875 at Castle Street in Enniskillen to John Boyle, who was a soldier, and Susan Scott. He was a smith's helper when he married Margaret Heenan on 7th April 1895 at St. Stephen's Free Church of Ireland at Millfield, and they were living at Berlin Street with their 5 children in 1911. Margaret Boyle died of pulmonary tuberculosis on 1st March 1912 at the age of 36, and Robert married Martha Bell at St. Anne's Parish Church on 1st June 1914. Robert Boyle enlisted with the Royal Irish Rifles on 9th September 1914 at the age of 39, having lied about his age. He was posted to the 9th Battalion in France in 1916. His son Robert Henry Boyle was serving with 1st Battalion Royal Irish Rifles when he was reported missing on the first day of the Battle of St. Quentin. He was subsequently confirmed as having been killed in action on 21st March 1918 at the age of 17, and he's buried in the Grand Serrecourt British Cemetery in France. Robert Boyle Sr. was on home service with the 3rd Battalion Northumberland Fusiliers when he was discharged due to sickness on 8th July 1918 with the Silver War Badge. His age on discharge was recorded as 38, but he was actually 43. He was awarded an 80% disablement pension at the rate of 32 shillings per week, which is £83 per week in current terms. Robert Boyle died of valvular heart disease of the heart and nephritis on the 8th September 1921 at the HILDEN Convalescent Hospital, and was buried in Belfast City Cemetery 2 days later. There's no memorial at his grave, but if he had died 9 days earlier, he might have qualified to be commemorated as an official war fatality. This map of the area shows Galwally with in brackets HILDEN Hospital below it. In 1921, the Ministry of Pensions offered to purchase the hospital, but the committee, following a suggestion by Mrs. Barber, decided instead to offer the hospital as a free gift to the nation. And this would have secured the continuation of convalescent services for ex-servicemen. In accepting the offer, the Ministry of Pensions stipulated that the current officials might not be retained. That's not the staff, it's the management committee. The committee was split on this, and on the casting vote of the chairman, rescinded the former offer. At this stage, Mrs. Barber and others resigned from the committee as they considered the decision to be short-sighted and a threat to the future of providing vital services for war veterans. One of the last patients to die at the HILDEN Convalescent Hospital was Thomas James Courtney Kirkpatrick, who died on 12th April 1924 and was buried in Dundonald Cemetery 2 days later. There is a modern headstone at the grave, but Thomas is not commemorated on the headstone. He was born in Scotland around 1894 to John Henry Courtney Kirkpatrick, who was a boilermaker, and Annie Lyons. The family moved to Belfast between 1896 and 1899 and was living at Harwood Street in 1901 and Hillfoot Street in 1911. Thomas Kirkpatrick served on HMS Narcissus, which is visible, and was living at Mersey Street when he married Elsie May Henshaw at Belfast Registrar's Office on 4th November 1918. Elsie Kirkpatrick was living at Rushfield Avenue when Thomas died. In 1924, the Ministry of Pensions decided it would only support one voluntary hospital in Northern Ireland as a convalescent facility for ex-servicemen. The ministry selected the UVF hospitals, and Galwally House was sold to the management board of the UVF hospitals for £8,000, £488,000 in current terms. This photograph is from the UVF Hospital Annual Report for 1953. And you can see that there's an additional extension that runs at right angles to the building. Just across the road, just across the Saintfield Road from Galwally House, 12 semi-detached bungalows had been built in 1919 by the Belfast branch of the Auctioneers and Estate Agents Institute, and they were built for permanently disabled ex-servicemen. The cottages, which were provided free of rent and rates, were all named after battles of the Great War. Sadly, the cottages no longer exist, but one of the original occupants died at Galwally Hospital in 1927 when it was being run by the UVF. George Shiels Storey was born in Liverpool on 16th July 1893 to George Storey, an iron turner, and Mary Shiels. The family had moved to Belfast by 1897 and was living at Roslin Street in the Ormo ward in 1911 before moving to Jocelyn Avenue by 1917. George Storey enlisted as a driver with the Royal Engineers on 7th January 1915 and was deployed to the Western Front sometime after December 1915. On 7th February 1917, he sustained shrapnel wounds and a fracture to the right tibia and was transferred to the number 18 hospital train on 15th November for evacuation to Ireland. On 20th November 1917, the Northern Whig reported that George's right leg had been amputated, but he was not discharged until 20th February 1919, being awarded the Silver War Badge. As an amputee, he would have received treatment in the limbless branch of the UVF hospital at Queen's University, where they had their own prosthetic manufacturing unit, which means that men didn't have to travel to another hospital or to another manufactory to get fitted out, to get measured for their prosthetic limbs. He was living in Jocelyn Avenue when he married Charlotte Dalzell from Boyne Street on 26 March 1919 at Newtownbreda Parish Church. The 1924 Belfast Street Directory records him as the occupant of Ypres Cottage, but George and Charlotte were living at Courtrai Cottage when George died at the UVF Hospital at Galwally on 5th June 1927 at the age of 33. He was buried in Newtownbreda Cemetery, and death notices were placed by the Ballinafie Guiding Star LOL 597, two lodges of the Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes, which had military associations. There's Sir Henry Wilson Memorial Lodge and the Lord French Lodge. This is another shot of Galwally House from the 1930s, and you can see the ridge of the original annex. You can also see the annex that was built at right angles to that original annex. And you can also see that the covered walkway, the covered connecting corridor between the original annex and the house has now been replaced by a full glass conservatory. In 1930, the UVF hospital at Galwally closed due to lack of patients, believe it or not. 1935, consideration was given to using the building as an isolation unit for children suffering from the osseous form of tuberculosis. In 1936, Newtownbreda aerodrome was being extended, and an army camp at Enniskillen was to become the new RUC depot. In September, as the new depot was not ready, it was announced that Galwally House would become the RUC depot. In 1937, the RUC was back at Galwally House for the duration of the coronation visit of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. In 1938, anti-gas attack instruction was provided on the site, probably in one of the annexes. And these are some of the civil servants, members of the British Red Cross, the Order of St. John, who had attended one of the gas instruction courses. In 1939, September 1939, just a few days after the start of the Second World War, an RUC constable was shot and killed in a tragic accident. Constable Lynch, the barrack orderly, was in the guardroom when Constable Irvine entered. Lynch was holding a revolver with ammunition in 5 chambers. He rotated the cylinder to the empty chamber, cocked the hammer, pointed it at Irvine and told him to get out before pulling the trigger. Of course, as it was at an empty round, nothing happened. Shortly afterwards, Constable George Brown from Limavady entered the guardroom, and Lynch repeated this routine, but he had failed to rotate the cylinder back to the empty chamber with disastrous consequences. Constable George Brown was killed, and he's buried in the graveyard at Ballykelly Presbyterian Church. Constable Lynch was tried for manslaughter, but the jury concluded that there was no malice involved. It wasn't intentional, and it was purely a tragic accident. After the start of the Second World War, the UVF Hospital Management Board reopened Galwally House and the annexes as a war hospital. One of the men who died there was Fusilier James Carricker of the 2nd Battalion Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, who was wounded at Dunkirk and treated at a hospital in England before being transferred to the UVF Hospital at Galwally House. Fusilier James Carricker died of his wounds on 1st March 1944, aged 30, and was buried with military honours at Victoria Cemetery in Carrickfergus. James Carricker was born on 30th July 1913 at John Street in Dundalk to Patrick Carricker and Alice Lamb, and they later lived at Taylor's Row in Carrickfergus. His father, Patrick Carricker, had served as a sergeant with the Royal Irish Rifles and the Labour Corps in the Great War. The UVF Hospital's Management Board continued to operate Galwally House as a convalescent hospital for ex-servicemen until 1970. In 1951, a Great War military medalist who had spent 16 years at the UVF Hospital died. William John McCormick, sometimes McCormack, was born on 21st November 1886 to Joseph McCormick and Sarah Jane Braithwaite. He enlisted with the Royal Irish Rifles and was deployed to France with 9th Battalion in October 1915. In March 1918, the London Gazette reported that he had been awarded the Military Medal. He was transferred to the Class Z Army Reserve on 11th February 1919 and was living at Mount Collier Road when he was awarded a 20% disablement allowance at the rate of 8 shillings and 8 pence per week. William John McCormick married Jane Agnew White on 7th July 1920 at St. Paul's Church of Ireland on York Street, and they had a son in 1921 and a daughter in 1925. William was a former British Army heavyweight boxing champion, and he died at the UVF Hospital on 11th February 1951 at the age of 64. He's buried in an unmarked grave in Dundonald Cemetery. The obituary published after his death reported that he had regularly gone into no man's land alone at night to try and capture Germans. The obituary also recorded that although affliction left him almost helpless, his cheery disposition was a feature of life at Galwally, where he was admired as much for his bravery in sickness as for his war exploits. During his period at Galwally, he attended 137 outings and almost 150 concerts, although his presence had tailed off in the years leading up to his death. He left a wife who lived at Merview Street in North Belfast, a married son and a married daughter. Charles IRWIN was another man who died at the UVF hospital at Galwally. He was born on 11th December 1888 at Stanley Street to Charles IRWIN and Mary Jane Moorhead. In 1911, he was stationed at China and Hong Kong with 1st Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers. He participated in the landings at Y Beach on the Cape Helles Peninsula on 25th April 1915, the start of the Gallipoli Land Campaign. He later served with the 6th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles and the 1st Battalion Leinster Regiment. Charles IRWIN was a sergeant when he married a widow called Margaret Jane Jones at St. Luke's Church of Ireland on Northumberland Street on the 28th of April 1917. He was transferred to the Class Z Army Reserve on 8th July 1919 and was awarded a 20% disablement pension in respect of bronchitis at the rate of 8 shillings per week, approximately £21 per week in current terms. After the war, he worked at Harland and Wolff. Charles and Margaret Jane were living at Ernie Street when Margaret died on 1st October 1944, aged 62, at the Belfast City Hospital. Charles IRWIN died on 30th November 1964, aged 75. They are buried in an unmarked grave in Belfast City Cemetery. In December 1966, newspapers reported on the possibility of the UVF hospital at Galwally House closing. At that time, the hospital at Craigavon House had a capacity of 46 beds and 36 patients, whilst Galwally House had a capacity of 55 beds and 33 patients. So both units, both locations for the Ulster Volunteer Force Hospital were not filling all their beds, and there was a replication of services with staff being needed at both locations. So it made sense for them to amalgamate, to build another extension at Craigavon House and bring all the services onto one site. In May 1967, newspapers reported that a chain store group was interested in purchasing the house and site for around £100,000, which would be 1.88 million in current terms, or £188,000 per acre. 2 months later, the sale was confirmed, with Mr. Noel Stephen, a director of Northern Dairies, being the new owner. At this stage, the Stevens family owned a swathe of land from Upper Newtownbreda Road to the Senfield Road. So the land that took in Galwally and the playing fields that were Cook Rugby Club, Red Roofs, Drumkeen, Northview, that land was all owned by the one family grouping, the Stevens family. One of the last patients to die at Galwally House when it was still a UVF hospital was the recipient of the military medal, in the Second World War. James Gordon was born on 17th March 1912 at Dunaverny near Ballymoney to William John Gordon and Mary Docherty. A Fusilier, James Gordon from Belfast, was serving with the Royal Irish Fusiliers when he was awarded the military medal in October 1945 in recognition of services in the fighting in Italy. James Alexander Gordon died on 2nd January 1969 at the age of 56 and is buried in an unmarked grave in Dundonald Cemetery. With Second World War, because a lot of the records aren't yet available, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly the history of this man. That's why I'm saying things like a James Gordon, because I can't be absolutely 100% certain that it's the James Alexander Gordon who died at the hospital. In 1974, the Police Authority for Northern Ireland purchased the house and grounds with plans to erect a police station on the site. Indeed, at one stage there were plans that this would be the police headquarters before that was later established at Brooklyn. The purchase price at this stage, 1974, is not known. In November 1977, newspapers reported that Castlereagh Borough Council, which was in need of new accommodation, had submitted a planning application for the Galwally House site with the hope that the police authority would sell the plot if the council's proposals got the green light. The police authority intimated that its proposals for the site were still being finalised. They subsequently applied to erect a subdivisional station on the grounds at Cook Rugby Club, with accommodation for 200 officers and parking space for over 350 vehicles. The proposals were unanimously opposed by councillors at Castlereagh Borough Council, and the planning application was rejected. The next development was in 1981, when Galwally House was designated as a Grade B1 listed building. By this stage, Noel Stevens had repurchased the house from the police authority. In January 1982, Galwally Developments, which was basically the Noel Stevens family, their company, unveiled plans to develop the site to include 40,000 square foot supermarket, 62-storey flats, and 32,000 square feet of office accommodation. The plans involved converting Galwally House for use as offices and the erection of a building to provide office accommodation. A figure of £3 million was placed on the development, but there was still considerable opposition from Castlereagh Borough Council, which still coveted the site. Local residents were also opposed to it, as were the owners, not surprisingly, of Supermac. The planning application was rejected in November 1982. Galwally Developments appealed the decision, and the Planning Appeals Commission granted permission for a modified development in May 1983. The permitted area for the supermarket complex was reduced to 28,000 square feet, and the total cost of the development was now estimated as being between £3 million and £5 million. A.D. Morrow of the Alliance Party subsequently wrote to the relevant minister requesting that the decision of the Planning Appeals Commission be overturned. That appeal was unsuccessful. In 1984, Galwally House, now on a 3-acre site, was acquired by Goldblatt Management Consultants, and the interior was adapted to provide office accommodation. James Watson restored the stained glass window, and the supervising architects were Philip Lynn and Tony Wright. In the late 1990s, Galwally House was leased to the local enterprise development unit, LEDU, who used the premises for a few years. Brian McConville, the proprietor of MGM Marine, purchased Galwally House in 2011 with plans to turn the house into a hotel. Those plans never materialized. The house lay empty for many years until the Provincial Grand Lodge of Down expressed an interest, and the house is now in use as a Masonic Hall. The Freemasons have plans to turn the ground floor into a community space, whilst the upper floors will be used by Masonic lodges and as offices. Provincial Grand Lodge of Down will purchase the house and the remaining grounds for £1.5 million in October of this year. We wait to see what will become of this fantastic building in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a really informative presentation and an excellent piece of research. It's great to see Jesse Roberts on the screen as well. I was very fortunate to know Jessie in the last 4 to 5 years of her life. Sadly, she passed away she was 107, but she was in her 108th year She was a most amazing lady. So she was, and when you spoke to her, she was so unassuming, and she just couldn't understand what our interest was when we used to go and see her and interview her, and why we were so interested in her service record. Because she didn't just serve then in the First World War, she went on as well in World War II to set up the Red Cross in Hollywood. And we're very fortunate in the museum because of our interest, as Nigel said, with Craigavon House as well. But we were really, really interested then in Jessie, and she allowed us to interview her. We have within the museum her oral testimony, but she also allowed us to video her, and we have her on a signpost in the museum where students can come pick up a telephone receiver and actually hear Jessie talk about some of her experiences in life. She was at near enough every big event that you can think of in our history. So she talks about witnessing Titanic set sail from Belfast. Her father had taken her down to the docks, and she talks about seeing it set sail, and then she talks about living through the trial and hearing all about the trial of what followed the aftermath of the sinking of Titanic and the Andrews family. And that seemed to leave quite a big mark on her as well. And everything else, she was at Craigavon House for Ulster Day in September. And the other good thing about Jessie, because she was from, as Nigel said, she was from, her father had owned the gasworks. She was from a middle class family, which meant she actually owned a camera. So she took photographs and archived a lot of the events she was at. She kept tickets, she kept programs, she kept various different things. And sadly then, when she passed away in 2001, she left a big majority of her collection then to the museum. And we're very fortunate to have it there and have her photograph album. So thank you very much, Nigel, for bringing her to life tonight again in your presentation. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to say thank you, Nigel. And I know it's I found that presentation very, very interesting and very in depth. And really, it's a grand building, iconic building. It's great to see it being retained and given a future length of life. Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to see inside it myself. You kindly showed it to me recently, which I hadn't been in it for yonks, and the craftsmanship is very noticeable in there of really, really excellent tradesmanship of fine joinery. The timbers used in the construction of the staircase, of the doors, archetures and skirtings and all, and the ceilings are unique. So so thank you for inviting me along to listen to your presentation.